Hi, I'm Nathan Cole of natesviolin.com, and today we're going to talk about left-hand finger pressure, how to find your MVP. In sports, they have the most valuable player, and in business, people will talk about a minimum viable product. For us, that's going to be minimum viable pressure, how to find that minimum amount and use no more than that. That's going to be crucial for fast passages, and especially fast and loud passages. It's funny how those tend to go together. Let's take one from the last movement of the Mendelssohn Concerto, just a slurred bunch of 16th notes. So a passage like that, there are different practice techniques you could use. I made another video about grouping notes. That's a video I did in collaboration with Noah Kageyama from the Bulletproof Musician. That's a great technique that helps to get passages even, and it's great for removing specific roadblocks that you have in a passage, you know, a tricky shift here or maybe a string crossing there. But sometimes in those passages, your problem is more general. It just won't get faster. It'll seem to be even maybe, but it just won't get faster no matter what you do. And perhaps your hand and your arm get tired and tight as well. And that will always lead to accuracy suffering. So to fix that, turn to an issue that's often neglected, and that's the finger pressure. The fact is that you only need a certain amount of pressure to stop the string. And when I say stop the string, I mean that only one side of the string vibrates and the other one doesn't. Right? If you play a harmonic, halfway up the G string, something like that, you can look and see that the string on either side of your finger is vibrating. Whereas if you play a solid note, of course, only the portion of the string between your finger and the bridge will vibrate, and that gives us what we would call a normal violin sound. So any more finger pressure than what's needed to stop the string is simply extra. Now, you've all seen and heard banging violin fingers, and perhaps you've even been taught that that's something to strive for, that means you have really strong fingers, and it might mean that, but the fact is that's not a great thing. It's good to have strong fingers, but you just don't need the extra pressure, because extra pressure means that you're putting in extra effort, you're using extra muscles perhaps, or groups of muscles, and that'll lead to tension, and tension is the enemy of everything: speed, accuracy, and even your overall lasting health as a violinist. I often think of pro golf swings when I'm thinking about this issue. I've played golf since I was a kid, and I remember particularly when I was a kid, I would get so frustrated watching the pros on TV. It looked like they were swinging so slowly and smoothly, but the ball would go forever. And I would complain to my dad, and he would tell me, well, it looks like they're swinging slow, but it's fast when it counts. And that's really the key. Those pros are only using the necessary muscle groups to swing the club. Those groups aren't fighting with each other, which can happen on violin as easily as golf. And then even though the swing is slow at certain points, it's very smooth and it's very fast at the critical moment, which is the very bottom of the swing, just before impact and through impact. So it's great speed at the critical moment. Another thing a little closer to the violin, pianists. In a Chicago Symphony rehearsal one time, Daniel Barenboim, who was conducting us, told us he liked to go on interesting tangents sometimes, and he remarked how some pianists could be loud but not sound like they were banging, and others were just bangers. So he mentioned Lang Lang and Yefim Bronfman being two people that could generate enormous sound without that harsh, pounding quality of the piano. And it had to do with the action of the piano and how sound is made there. So on the piano, when you press a key, a hammer starts to rise. If we're talking about a grand piano anyway, a hammer starts to rise toward the string. And then as you continue pressing the key down, just before that hammer would reach to strike the string, a felt damper lifts up. And then the hammer strikes the string, and as long as the key is kept down, that felt stays up. So press the key, hammer starts to rise. Just before it strikes, the felt lifts up. So once that hammer strikes the string, of course, you don't need to keep putting in more pressure. In fact, if you do that and you're quote unquote banging the piano, that key is going to smack down and hit the bottom of the key frame, and that's one of the things that generates that harsh sound. So a pianist like Bronfman will press the key slowly. Which one is the hammer? Press the key slowly while that hammer rises, and then just as the felt lifts, there goes the speed. And it's an enormous sound, but then the pressure stops once the hammer has struck the string. So again, it's speed at the critical moment, just before and through the hammer strike, but then no more than necessary. So, enough talk. Let's get to violin and how to find your MVP. Let's think of a scale of pressure between 0 to 10. 0 is going to be the fingers aren't even touching the strings, not so useful, but we'll call that 0. 10 would be just as hard as you could press down on the strings. So go ahead and feel what 10 would feel like for you. And if you want, go ahead and play around with other numbers too. What would 2 feel like? 5, 8, and just to feel all the difference that you can make in those pressures. Now, between 0 and 10, everybody has 4 checkpoints. And we're going to define what those are because it's going to be important for you to find them. It doesn't matter which number those checkpoints occur on for you, although the first is always at number 1. But what's important is that you can find them. So the first checkpoint is always at number 1, and that is a harmonic sound. So we all know that certain notes sound as harmonics, halfway up the string perhaps. So 1 finger pressure is absolutely as lightly as you can touch the string. So now if I take that passage in the Mendelssohn that starts, that first note, a D sharp, well, that's not a natural harmonic on the violin, but I'm still going to play it as lightly as I can. So I hear what I expect to hear, just noise. And that's good, because if I hear the D sharp, even faintly, that means I'm using too much finger pressure for pressure 1, for that first checkpoint. The next note is a harmonic. So again, now if I'm going to slur the passage, I'll still do it under tempo. I'm getting harmonic sounds. Once in a while I might hear a little note, but I'm getting harmonic sounds and pure noise. That's 1. Some people, actually many people, find that hard to do. They're used to using much more finger pressure than that, and it's hard even to hear the harmonics. But work until you can get just harmonics there. Then you go to pressure 2 and see what that's going to feel like. Pressures 2, 3, in that range, you're going to be hearing a tiny bit of note, but it's going to be mostly noise. And so at whatever point you can say, I'm getting mostly noise, but I can hear the note, that's going to be your second checkpoint. So it's a lot of noise, but I'm hearing the notes now, I'm hearing the passage. That's the second checkpoint. The third checkpoint, as you keep going up number by number, and whatever that means for you, the third checkpoint is going to be where you're hearing mostly note, but still a little noise. So as I keep going, and a little bit more pressure, I would call that the third checkpoint. That's where I'm hearing mostly notes, but it's not yet a pure sound. So I'm going to add just a little bit more. Actually, that's a pure sound. My hand feels so light, but that is a pure sound. That's my MVP. So for me, that was at 5. I got to 5, and that's my MVP. And MVP should also stand for maximum violin pressure, because once you reach that, you don't need any more. So There is a big rule for this, and that is that your bow always needs to be forte. The bow's got to remain strong throughout all this. That is very difficult for many people to do at first. And why? Why does it need to remain forte? It's because we have a natural connection between our two hands. And when the left hand is playing fast and loud, the right hand wants to play fast and loud, and vice versa. And that connection is the source of this whole problem. That's why when we're playing fast and loud, we tend to grip as well and squeeze. So we have to break that connection. It's kind of like the, rubbing your head and patting your stomach thing. Two things at once, but it's crucial to break that connection to gain control of the hands independently. So there's one more side reason for doing that, and that's that if you practice this quietly, it doesn't take as much finger pressure to stop a quietly vibrating string because the vibrations are narrower. And so you could do all this work only to find that suddenly it doesn't work for you in a loud passage, and then you're just going to be frustrated. So practice it always forte in the right hand, no matter what your pressure is. So let's go through the process quickly one more time. I start with pressure 1, and now I'm going to up the tempo, because eventually I want to be able to do this in tempo, as you'll see. I can feel my right hand wanting to fight me. It wants to play lightly. I'm constantly having to get it to bear into the string. And then pressure 2, pressure 2, I'm sorry. Okay, that's my next checkpoint. 3. About half and half. Here's 4. I'd call that my third checkpoint. Here's pressure 5. And once again, at 5, I seem to hit my pure sound. So the boundary between MVP and MVP minus 1, for me now that's 4, 5. For you it could be 5, 6 or 3, 4. Wherever that boundary is, keep exploring that. Keep going back to minus 1 and then the MVP. So 4 for me again. 5. And back to 4 and 5. Play with that boundary till you have precise control over just not quite enough and the perfect amount of pressure. Gradually increase the tempo of the passage until you can play it in tempo, both with the MVP and the MVP minus 1. Because when you can do that, when you can play those two things at tempo, you know you've got control over the passage. It's at 4. That's at 5, my MVP, and my hand feels so light and free. So, have fun with this technique. Make sure to go to natesviolin.com. Be sure that you're signed up for my emails where I'm going to send you all my latest tips, videos, articles. And while you're there, of course, you can download my free practice guide that's got so many more practice techniques. So have fun with the Mendelssohn and all the other fast and loud stuff that you're going to play.